Good evening to you. My name's Neil Harvey and you're watching RT International. Now, a ceasefire has come into force in Syria, taking effect at midnight local time. The government and armed opposition groups have agreed to halt all conflict under a deal brokered by Russia and the US. Along with the Syrian government, almost 100 opposition factions in the country have confirmed that they will respect the truce. However, Islamic State and the Nusra Front, along with other groups on the UN terror list, are not part of the deal. Military action will continue against them. Across the agreed ceasefire areas, the situation is relatively calm at the moment. However, the country's capital, Damascus, has reportedly been shelled from nearby rebel-held territory. We've gauged opinion from Syrians about the agreement.
Do you think people are happy to see the bloodshed, to see the devastation and the ruins? Let people have a break and get on with simply leaving.
I don't have much hope the ceasefire will stand. When there is a ceasefire, the Syrian army also ceases to move forward. They impose a ceasefire when the government troops start to gain ground.
We stand for the political agreement if it helps to improve things in the country. If it doesn't, we'll need the military solution. It's essential to do away with the terrorists, whatever.
The ceasefire is good for the country. Less Syrian blood will be spilled in vain. It's necessary that everyone supports the deal without any treachery and deceit.
Russia's warplanes have remained grounded at their home base in Latakia. The Russian Defense Ministry has said that it's halted all of its airstrikes on Saturday.
To exclude any possible mistakes, Russian warplanes, including our long-range bombers, will not conduct any flights today on February the 27th.
Russia's military has created a special map for the US. It outlines the areas subject to the truce, as well as terrorist-controlled territories. Moscow also said that it's delivering tons of humanitarian aid to the war-torn areas in desperate need of supplies. The situation also remains extremely fragile in the key northern city of Aleppo. Surrounding areas are still occupied by terrorist groups who are excluded from the ceasefire. Our correspondent Lizzie Phelan reports from the city.
Well, there's been a couple of reports of the ceasefire being violated, not in Aleppo itself. Syrian State TV has just reported a car bomb on the entrance to the province of Hama. The United Nations envoy to Syria, Staffan de Mistura, also reported before that a violation of the ceasefire. He didn't give any further details, but said that his team is investigating. And just before midnight last night, state media reported that here in Aleppo there was a rocket attack on a residential neighborhood that killed one child. Over the last few days, I've traveled pretty much throughout all neighborhoods of the government side of the front line, speaking to civilians and soldiers.
I believe that when the peace comes back and everything returns to its normal, people continue their life.
The Syrian people want to put an end to this war that is destroying us. We need the ceasefire so we can start dialogue towards building a new Syria.
We hope the ceasefire will hold. We will respect the truce, but we don't know what our enemies will do. We are fighting al-Nusra. The insurgents are all over Aleppo.
Many people say that Al-Qaeda's franchise in Syria, Jabhat al-Nusra, which is excluded from the agreement, has a widespread presence amongst the opposition here. I've seen the al-Nusra flag flying high alongside the flags of other opposition factions. Here in the Aleppo countryside, the Syrian army offensive against ISIS that has been raging for the last few months continues.
Well, the UN Security Council voted unanimously in favour of the plan brokered by Russia and the US. The resolution endorses the terms of the truce between the Syrian government and rebel factions who are now required to stop seizing territory. All parties must also allow humanitarian aid to reach civilians caught in the crossfire. They could use proportionate force in self-defence and against groups that have not signed up to the truce. Washington correspondent Gani Chichikan has more on the UN meeting.
Well, with this resolution, the UN Security Council is fully backing the cessation of hostilities plan negotiated almost exclusively by Russia and the US. The two countries came together to press on the parties of the Syrian conflict with whom they have influence to actually make this happen. But imagining the U.S. and Russia holding hands and leading Syria to peace may be premature.
We are, therefore, deeply concerned by the continued Syrian and Russian aerial bombardment of towns across Syria. That transition, as we have said all along, must be a transition away from Bashar al-Assad.
The use of terrorists as a weapon to achieve geopolitical goals must stop.
This is a very fragile ceasefire, as both Russia and the U.S. agree that it does not include terrorists. The challenge is that some of the rebel groups who agreed to the ceasefire are in the same neighborhoods as al-Nusra and other terrorists. And as we understand from what the UN Special Envoy de Mistura said earlier today, all reports of non-compliance will go to either the envoy's office or directly to Russia or the U.S.
There is a high chances that we should expect some hiccups, that needs of adjustments, and tensions and incidents.
He also said that we should not immediately, this should not prompt us to immediately declare that the ceasefire has failed.
Well, the ceasefire deal has already faced some criticism, with media headlines expressing doubt over whether the truce can persist. We spoke to former UK ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford. He says that it's still a significant step forward.
Well, it would be easy to be pessimistic, but in fact I am cautiously optimistic that at least a partial ceasefire will take hold. The al-Nusra and Islamic State groups are excluded, and they do control large segments of the battle front, so the fighting will continue. But it's nevertheless very significant that the so-called moderate opposition or part of the moderate opposition has signed up for a ceasefire. The new agreement has this crucial clause that any party who steps out of line will or can be bombed, and no one is going to complain.
And a few days after the agreement was reached, the US Secretary of State said that Washington had a plan B, which could involve dividing up Syria.
This can get a lot uglier, and Russia has to be sitting there evaluating that too. But it may be too late to keep it as a whole Syria if we wait much longer.
John Kerry said that a partition of the country could happen if the truce collapsed or if a shift to a transitional government did not take place in the coming months. Journalist and author David Swanson believes that groups inside the US have ulterior motives.
We have to see this expand from a limited ceasefire of certain parties to ceasing to facilitate mass killing by other parties, disarmament, aid. Many in the U.S. and in the other nations involved want it to fail and want to be able to say, hey, we tried this and now we're going to try something else, which in the view of Secretary Kerry is to partition Syria, which he has, of course, no ability to do. He's partitioned his conscience, it appears to me. But the problem with the ceasefire is its limited nature.
And we are closely following developments in Syria right from here in our studio in Moscow and with our correspondents who are on the ground. Stay tuned for the latest updates and live analysis here on RT International.